18-year-old Keith Blackburn put his .25 caliber pistol to the side of Misty Wright's head and pulled the trigger. The bullet went through her gum, through her esophagus, and severed her carotid artery. He left her for dead. Keith was apprehended and charged with attempted murder, but that's not the end. This true story will keep you on the edge of your seat and baffle your mind with its emotional crime plot and unforeseeable ending. Stay tuned. Hi friends, you're watching Everlasting Love. I'm so glad that you decided to join us. We love doing this show. This gives us an opportunity to hear stories and testimonies of people from all walks of life. And I have been so moved over the years that we have been doing this show. People's stories and testimonies can really just rock your world and remind you how much God loves us. And that's why we call this program Everlasting Love, because God does love us with an everlasting love. Doesn't matter what experiences we may have had in life, things that we may have done, people that we may have hurt, people who have hurt us. The Word says that God loved us so much that He sent Jesus Christ into this world. And if you would just receive Him into your life, that He will forgive you and bring salvation and victory and direction and destiny into your life. I want to share a scripture with you from Matthew chapter 6, verses 14 and 15. It says, "For if you forgive men their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive men their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses." And right now, this might not mean a whole lot to you, but you're going to hear a powerful story. It's actually been penned in a book called Face to Face. And we're going to really get into it in this program. You are not going to want to change that dial. I also want to remind you that if you'd like to see any of our previous programs, we have a YouTube channel. We would also love to hear from you. We're on Facebook as well. Please feel free to reach out to us. If you're looking for a good church, if you want someone to pray with you, we would be happy to get back to you. So without further ado, I want to introduce my guest, Misty. And I know, Misty, that at the intro you were Misty Wright.
Yes.
You're actually Misty Wallace.
That's correct.
I just want to make sure that we get that right. And I am absolutely thrilled to have you on our program. You are here because you are a co-author in a book of a book called Face to Face. Right. And I don't want to give away the highlight of this story, but I want you to just tell us a little bit about who Misty Wallace is. Yeah, just tell us, you know, your story. Like growing up, you grew up in Indiana.
I grew up in Indiana,
yes.
Indianapolis.
Indianapolis.
I went to high school, was 18 years old, was headed off to college, and some things in my life changed very quickly.
Okay, so what was it like for you growing up? You went to high school. What were some of your ambitions? What was kind of the direction of your life?
When my high school, I played softball a lot. I enjoyed softball. I played constantly. I worked part-time. My father was pretty much a stickler on paying my car insurance, and so I bounced around between softball and working part-time and going to high school. So My life consisted of working, playing softball, and going to school.
Okay, kind of like a typical teenager.
Right.
And I saw that you received a softball scholarship as well.
Yes, correct.
So you were going to go to college and play softball in
Yes.
college. And at this time in your life, God, church, was any of that important?
Growing up with church, I went to church. I believed in God. I've always believed in God, but my faith wasn't as strong. I went to church with my aunt and uncle on Sundays. My parents worked a lot, so my aunt took care of us, and pretty much we went to church on Sundays with them. I knew church, but I really didn't know God yet.
Yeah, but you didn't know God.
Right.
So growing up, typical teenager, I know you had a boyfriend,
Yes.
too. You talk about him in the book, Scott.
Yeah.
You want to talk about him at all?
He was a few years older than me, and he graduated a couple of years older than me, and he went into the military, the Navy, sorry. He went into the Navy, and so I was at home for 2 years finishing school while he was in California, but we stayed in contact quite a bit. And
so there's an incident in the book that is going to kind of segue us into this story.
Yes.
So you said he was going in one direction, you were going in another,
correct.
right? And you were out on a date.
Yes.
Kind of. This
he
was
had
around.
came home for a visit, and we were pretty much planning a wedding because as soon as I got out of school, we were going to marry. I was going to go to school in Indianapolis. But on October 18th, 1992, my life changed forever. We were out on a date that night on the southwest side of Indianapolis. We were out having a good time with some friends of ours. About halfway through the night, he and I got into an argument that I couldn't even tell you what it was about today. I mean, I have no clue. But I was mad enough when I pulled away from dropping him off that night that I made the comment to myself that I wish I was dead.
That you were what?
I wish I was dead.
That you wished you were dead.
But I was just angry. I was young. I was dumb.
Okay.
I was just like the young and dumb phrase, because now I look back and I'm like, why would I even say those words?
Okay.
I mean, nothing in life is worth saying that over.
Sure.
I mean,
sure.
but I had no clue what my night was going to be like. I pulled away from his house angry. I drove up Kentucky Avenue, and believe it or not, in 1992, I'm sorry, we did not have cell phones. So my intention was to pull over and call home and let my mom and dad know I was going over to a friend's to stay. I was angry. I didn't really want to go home and be upset. So I pulled into the Burger King restaurant, went through the drive-thru, got a drink, pulled up next to the payphone. When I pulled up next to the payphone, I got out, called mom and dad. They didn't answer the phone, so I called Scott, who I was mad at, and I told him, I said, hey, I'm going over to a friend's house. Don't call and wake my mom and dad up. And as I was talking to him, I noticed that a car had pulled into the Burger King restaurant. And I watched it pull in. It was kind of odd to me and kind of threw me off. Why I stayed focused on it was that they pulled up to the front door. And I knew that the inside wasn't open. But I wasn't scared. I mean, there was nothing that crossed my mind of fear. I was just kind of watching, like, is it going to go inside, you know? And he got out of the passenger side of the vehicle, and he walked towards the back end of my car, and he asked me how long I was going to be. And I looked at him, and I said, just a few minutes. And my boyfriend on the phone said, who's that? And I said, someone that wants to use the payphone. And he said, okay, call me when you get to Jeanette's. And I hung up the phone. As soon as I hung up the phone, I turned around, and he stuck a gun in my head, stuck it to the left side of my cheek. The bullet went down through my left cheek, down through my esophagus, severed the carotid artery, bounced up and broke the top 2 vertebrae in my neck. My body automatically went into shock, and my head landed underneath the front tire of my vehicle.
He just pulled out a gun
said
while
nothing.
you were in the phone booth,
Yes, said
and
nothing,
shot you.
Yes.
And said nothing?
No.
Wow.
I didn't even know what hit me. I was still alert, but my body was in shock. So I couldn't move my body. I was face down underneath the front tire of my vehicle, and at that point in my life, I was calling out to God.
So you actually fell.
Yes.
And you were under the car?
Yes, the way my body landed, but my body was in shock, so I could not move it.
Okay.
I couldn't move my body.
Okay, so you're laying under the car. Yeah. You're still somewhat conscious of what's going on.
Yes, and it was hard, but I seen his feet get into my car. I could see underneath it. I could see he had gone around and gotten into my car. And at that point in my life, not being the believer, you know, at that time, I mean, not having that trust in God at the time, all I could think about was, please, God, don't let this car start.
Because if the car would have started...
He would have backed over my head.
Would have backed over your head.
Yeah.
Wow.
A few seconds later, he exited my vehicle, walked across the parking lot. As he walked away, I said, please help me.
So the car did not start?
No.
Unreal. And it had been working prior to that?
Yeah.
And it just, so it didn't start?
No. A few weeks later, we found it had to be towed from the crime scene. We found out that the starter had went out on the car, and I had no trouble with it starting it at all before then.
Unreal. And right at that moment.
Yes.
Okay, so I want my audience to know that what you don't know is at this point, I actually want to introduce to you Keith Blackburn, who was the shooter. So Keith, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
And so I'm listening to this story, and I'm kind of almost like there with Misty as she's telling this story. And so on that day in October 1992, you are the one that shot Misty.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Can you kind of tell us your side of the story? I mean, and even before you get to that day, tell us a little bit about who Keith is.
Okay. I know your listeners and viewers, like many in society, would ask, you know, what kind of monster would go into a parking lot and a payphone and shoot a woman in the head and leave her there to die? You know, what kind of parents did such a monster have? You know, we think about society and questions of why, you know, could somebody prevented it? What was they thinking? What was he thinking? I had a mom and dad that loved me very much. I didn't grow up in a broken home. I grew up in a home that was just broke. And at 13 years old, I made a decision that I wanted things that I couldn't afford, things that I didn't earn, and I began to steal. I began, you know, stealing, shoplifting stuff, selling it, stealing hood ornaments off of Mercedes and Cadillacs, taking them to school, selling them. 14 years old, got involved with a street gang, rebelling against everything, godly, everything at home. I actually went anti-God. 15, started carrying a gun. Was fascinated with serial killers, fascinated with Halloween, the movies with Michael Myers, called myself the boogeyman. Was real pale, dressed in all black. When I was 16, I started drinking, became, in a sense, a Hollywood version of Satanist, things I seen on the big screen. Mm-hmm. When I was 16 years old, I got a black cat in the neighborhood. I took it, I slit its throat, cut myself, burning candles, and, you know, made a covenant with the devil, said I was going to serve him for the rest of my life. 17, I started using LSD and more of a spiritual side of tripping on acid and drinking, getting more violent, more and more cold, more and more dark, rebelling against God. I was hated God. I was against God. 18, October, I was 18 years old and out to do a robbery, and I needed a car to take and just throw away.
And the robbery, as I understand, was to feed your habit.
Yeah, it was just, I just wanted money to go party, mm-hmm. You know, get high, go party, and just have money. And that was my source of income at the time. I was out robbing and needed a car, looking for a car, and you heard the story. Found one at a Burger King restaurant.
But now I understand that you actually were going to rob a convenience
Yeah,
store prior
needed a
to
car.
that. And that didn't.
Yeah, I'd actually had a bad knee. I couldn't run, and to rob the convenience store, I was going to have to run down to where my car was waiting. So I was needing a vehicle to be able to get in and then drive back to where I had my car waiting, so I could leave the scene and wouldn't be arrested. And that was the process of going to motor to go get a car. And we found, you heard the story, we found one, and I approached the back end of the vehicle to see if the keys was in the ignition. And they were, but as I was approaching it, I had noticed she was looking at me. You heard in her account that she was watching me. And as her eyes met my eyes, I made a decision in that moment that I wasn't going to leave any witnesses, that there wasn't going to be nobody live in that parking lot. So I pulled a gun, and I did something you can never undo. I pulled the trigger, and before her body had fell underneath the car, I was already around to steal it. That's why I was there. I was there to steal the car.
What was your state of mind at that moment? Because that sounds very cold-blooded.
And that was in my mindset as the boogeyman, cold, darkness, evil, trying to embody evil, trying to be evil. And when I sit down in the car to steal it, I didn't know what you and your viewers know. I didn't know her head had fell underneath the tire. I knew I was there to steal the car, and I turned the key. It didn't do anything. I didn't know what you and your viewers know, that she was praying, God, don't let this car start.
And I just, right here, I'm looking at Misty, and I see all the emotion, and I saw your emotion even as she was telling the story. And this was over 25 years ago. And it's just even so real, even as you're talking about it today. This is one of these stories, I think, that, and there's so much more to it, that I think we can keep telling. And those of you that are watching this, this is a story that you are going to be able to share with others. And it's definitely going to have an impact on their lives. So you shot her, cold-blooded, you get in the car doesn't start.
I tried 3 times.
3 times?
3 times to start the car. It didn't do anything.
Didn't even turn over at all.
And so I left to get in my car to leave the scene. And as I was walking away, she said 2 words that have stuck with me over the years. And as I was walking away, leaving her in a puddle of blood in that parking lot, she said, help me. And I chose to walk away, leaving her to die. And I didn't know if she lived. I didn't know if she died. I didn't read the newspaper. I didn't watch the news. I went on with my life like nothing had ever happened. And a week after the shooting, I actually had knee surgery. They had to reconstruct my knee. So I was at home a week after the shooting, recovering from knee surgery. And let Misty share a little bit of...
Yeah.
I was at home recovering from my surgery. I went through a very lengthy surgery. I'm back at, you're still laying under this car. Yeah. And what happens? I was laying there, and he had drove away, and he must have driven away at the same time. A gentleman that was working a shift, that he got called in at a big company in Indianapolis called Rolls-Royce, and he got called in to go in and run some. It was during Saudi Arabia, so he was running some. They brought some sand over from Saudi Arabia to do the special test engine for these jet planes for the military. He went in, did the test, and came back fine. Left a little bit earlier than he was supposed to, didn't have a manager or anything, so he left. When he pulled out of his job, he always goes right and gets on the interstate and goes home. That night, for some reason, his car, he turned left, and he came up Kentucky Avenue, and it was a little bit longer route for him than normal. Came up Kentucky Avenue and passed the Burger King, and as he was driving by, he had seen my body laying on the ground. next to my car, and he thought it was just kind of odd. So he pulled into this plaza area that was next to the Burger King and shined his lights on me, and I wasn't moving. So, but unfortunately at that time I did figure out, and I don't know how, I don't recall at this point, you know, even I think about it all the time trying to figure it out, how I even got turned over, but I did eventually get myself on my back, which was not a good idea. Because at that point,
the injury, there was, like you said, the carotid artery and your neck.
Right.
Right.
And at that point I was choking and gurgling in my own blood. I was choking to death on my own blood. The gentleman that pulled over, that was working a shift that he got called into on a Saturday night, he pulled over. He was an elderly man. He was a certified EMT. So he rolled me over on my side, started putting pressure on my neck and my face. He had no, I mean, he could tell I was obviously shot, but he didn't know me, I didn't know him. And at that point, it was getting harder for me to stay conscious. He said that I could hear him, but it was kind of hard because my ears were ringing really bad. He said that he had called 911 and the ambulance was on the way, and he was going to stay with me until he told me he had to run to the trunk and get something, a kit out of the back of the trunk, and he came right back to me and he held my hand and just pressure on my face and everything until they got there. And they took me to a hospital in Indianapolis for gunshots, Wisher Hospital. I got out of the ambulance, they took me in, they started running a bunch of tests. At that point when they found out that it did hit the tip of the carotid artery, and so I was bleeding internally, and that they needed to get me into surgery very quickly. I went into surgery 19 hours later, woke up on a ventilator in ICU, came off of the ventilator 2 days later, started breathing on my own, went to a regular room. Day 7, I went home.
So he's getting knee surgery.
In the same hospital.
In the same hospital as you're getting surgery.
Yes.
And now, do you know this at all?
No.
Oh, my goodness.
No.
Okay. No. All right, so what happens after all of this?
I eventually went home. I had staples from the back of my ear all the way down to my throat, and the bullet stayed in my neck for 2 years. So I lost the scholarship.
You lost the scholarship?
Yeah, lost the scholarship to play ball.
Okay.
Which made me very depressed.
Of course.
And I got very depressed, sad, just my family tried to keep me spirited and outgoing and, you know, supporting me. I'd been home, like you said, a month, and I was recovering, and I told my dad I needed to get out of the house. So later that evening we left. We went to visit my grandfather, who was recently diagnosed with prostate cancer at that time. It was just getting me out to get some fresh air because I was at home for a month. And Indianapolis is a pretty decent sized city, and what are the odds that my first stoplight I come to before pulling in my grandfather's house, I'm face to face with the vehicle that pulled into the Burger King restaurant that night.
You recognized it?
Yes, right away. I lifted my head and I told him, I said, that's the car. And the guy
told
driving,
your dad that?
Yeah, I said the guy driving the car now is the guy that shot me. That guy is the one that shot me.
So he was in the car?
Yeah, I was face to face across from the stoplight at me.
Okay.
And he had turned onto Lyndhurst, and we followed him. He pulled into a gas station, and when he got a fountain pop and came out of the gas station, I wrote down his license plate number. I went to my grandfather's house, called my detective, and said I had the plate. I seen the vehicle. I seen the guy that shot me. And then they went to his house the next morning.
So what happens? Yeah. The police are at your door now, Keith.
We'll back up the first. You know, I'd been recovering from the knee surgery. My car hadn't been out since the shooting, so I figured if anybody was looking for me, you know, if the police were looking for me, they'd given up or whatever, hadn't been outside, and I was thirsty. I'm gonna go to the corner gas station, get a pop, get a Pepsi. What could go wrong? And I didn't know that right there on the corner I'd be face to face with the woman I'd shot.
And you don't know?
I didn't know it.
You didn't know that she had seen you?
No, I just went. Wow. I went to get my Pepsi.
Okay.
And I came home, drank my Pepsi, and the next day detectives came and would like to talk to Keith Blackburn, like to talk to him about a shooting at a payphone in his car, and I said I didn't do it. It wasn't me. You got the wrong person. I lied to him. Whoever did this horrible crime, you need to go arrest them. You need to get them off the street. If I hear anything, I'll let you know. And they didn't believe my lies. Took me downtown, more questioning. Had an eyewitness, of course. They had my license plate number, so they had enough to keep me, but I pled not guilty. Mm-hmm. And by pleading not guilty, that led us into a jury trial, which was a nightmare for Misty.
During that trial, his sister would sit outside the courtroom, and I couldn't be in the courtroom because I had to testify. And they called me in the first day, so
his sister was sitting outside
the courtroom, and
okay.
I would come out, and she would be very upset that, why am I doing this to her brother? How horrible of a person I am.
They thought I was
innocent. And it got so bad that they had to since went out there to sit with me. Because I didn't want my parents to leave the courtroom. I wanted them to hear everything that was going on.
Okay.
But they wouldn't allow me to be in the courtroom in case I had to come back and testify again. So, even in trial, when I went up to the stand, he wouldn't even lift his head from the table. He wouldn't look at me. He just acted like he didn't care.
How were you feeling at that time, Keith?
I had practiced staring through walls, staring through people, so I could sit for hours with no emotion and just stare. And that's what I did. I'd stare at the legal pad, stare at the ice water, stare at a spot on the floor. I didn't have to think about the trial. I wasn't involved. I was, in a sense, escaped it in my mind. So I was cold.
Did you ever look at her? Did you ever? What do you think would have happened if you would have looked at Misty?
I don't know, because I was so focused on, not looking at her, looking at her family. I didn't look at the jury. I was trying to be, because it was kind of them that, either if you show emotion, you're guilty. If you don't show emotion, your guilt is. I was just trying to process everything, and was I'd draw in the legal pad. I would stare at stuff.
And at that moment, really, you were the only one who knew.
Yeah.
Outside, because there wasn't another individual with you during this.
He was never arrested for anything.
Okay, so you knew at that time that you were guilty of all of this, and you were kind of the only one.
And
really.
I was pleading not guilty,
and pleading
hoping
not
to,
guilty.
hoping to be able to get free. That was my only goal.
Okay.
Thankfully, I got found guilty. The jury actually came back at late at night and was hung 11-1.
Huh. So there was one person.
One person that didn't quite agree with everything, and the judge said, no, I know it's late, everybody's tired, but go back in, review the evidence, we want a verdict. And they went back in, come back out about a half hour or so later, and they actually split the verdict. They said guilty on attempted murder, not guilty on robbery, because they never found her purse. They found me guilty for a handgun, because obviously if she's shot, there was a handgun. And they found me not guilty on the attempt auto theft, because the car, the starter went out and the car was never stolen. So they didn't really prove that happened. But I was guilty of all of that, and as you heard the story, I was guilty of more robbery than even what I was charged with. I mean, I robbed her of her scholarship to play softball. I robbed her of her dreams.
Yeah.
I robbed her of her peace of mind.
Yeah, and I want to hear how you were feeling, right, during this, because you already talked about how difficult it was with his sister being there.
Right.
It's funny though. I do want to say, Keith, when I read about you putting the purse down the sewer, it made me think, how many purses would we find? And wallets and other articles that have been robbed from people in our sewer system.
Right.
I was picturing you just doing that. But How are you feeling? How long was this trial?
Unfortunately, it was just 2 days, but man, it felt like forever.
It was long.
So there must have been a preponderance of evidence.
Yeah,
then,
there
right?
was cops, doctors,
Yeah.
us, and pretty much they were just trying to. The doctors were on my behalf.
And I had defense. I was pleading not guilty, so we was trying to prove that there was no way that I could walk or run. And we was arguing if the person ran, but I didn't run from the scene. I walked because I couldn't run because I had a bad knee.
Mm-hmm.
The part that we conveniently left out was, yeah, my knee was destroyed and totaled. Mm-hmm. But if you're drinking and tripping on acid and taking pain medications, I could walk. I couldn't run. And that was where we was trying to find that little. Well, my client couldn't walk.
When you saw him, Misty, in that car, and then of course again in the courtroom, what were you feeling?
He was a mean person.
You just felt he was mean.
Mean and had no emotions. Nothing.
So what were you feeling inside?
Mad.
Just mad.
I was
and
mad
angry.
at the world. I was mad at him. I was mad at God. I was mad at everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, talk about that,
Yeah.
being angry at God. And that's interesting because you prayed to God when,
Right.
when your head was under
Right,
that
exactly.
tire. But I could understand why you could be angry with God, right? Like, where was God in all of this?
Right.
So talk about that anger that you had.
God was there. And unfortunately, I didn't see it until he played it all out for me. But he was there.
But people would say, how? How was he there?
Well, nobody lives through a severed carotid artery. That's huge. Nobody lives through a severed carotid artery. The starter went out on my car that night. He took me right to Keith.
Yeah. And somebody came, made a left
And the
turn
guy,
instead of a right turn.
And directed him. He directed him to me.
Yeah.
And that gentleman's name is Tim Williams. And Tim is probably about 78 years old now.
Oh.
And we're still friends. I mean, we talk quite a bit.
Yeah.
And he not only saved my life on October 18, 1992, but he saved my life again in October of 2005 when he baptized me in his church.
Okay.
Himself.
So, I want to get there, right? So you're now found guilty, and what happens?
I get transferred from Marion County Jail to our receiving a diagnostic center, RDC, to go to maximum security prison.
How old are you? 18?
I'm 18.
You're 18. Okay.
I got sentenced to 20 years. 20 years was not long enough for what I had done, but 20 years to me was more years than I had been on earth. And I didn't understand how the Department of Corrections worked, and day for day or 2 for 1, and I would ultimately end up doing 8 years and 8 months on a 20-year sentence in Indiana.
Okay.
But in the midst of that, when I went to jail, I was still evil, still worshiping the devil. When I got to Pendleton, I got the Satanic Bible, Anton LaVey's Bible. So I was practicing Satanism by the book at that time. Got introduced to the dark arts with Aleister Crowley and a few other Golden Bound, just different dark, just meditative and doing dark stuff. Was getting a little more spiritual in that aspect, and I tatted, put tats all over my body of devils and skulls, and just independent prison, and still getting high, still tripping on acid, still smoking weed, still
all accessible in
everything
prison,
in prison. I'd been there about three years, and I was going to be 21. And my 21st birthday was coming up. It was October 9th of 1995. And my mom, I'd been lying to my mother saying I was not guilty. And so, and I always say mothers will ride with their sons and daughters, or, in my case, a son, till the wheels fall off. And then mom will help you jack the car up, put the wheels back on, won't ask you where you got the new wheels. It's just that motherly love is relentless. And unconditional and relentless. But she believed, in a sense, I think deep down she knew I was guilty, but she still would support I was her son. And she told me to listen to the country radio station on my birthday. And I said, Mom, you know, I listen to rap. I don't want to listen to country. She goes, well, I'm going to dedicate a song to you. So I'm sitting in my cell on my 21st birthday, put my headphones on, and the radio announcer said, this song goes out to Keith, who's in Pendleton, said, God loves you, and your mama tried. And they played a song by Merle Haggard that I'd never heard called Mama Tried. And as I heard Merle's words for the first time, I said, man, that's talking about me. You know, in spite of my Sunday learning, to the bad, I kept on turning. No one could steer me right, but Mama tried, and I'm starting to cry, and I'm 21 in prison. You know, I wasn't doing life without parole, thankfully, but I was still 21 in prison, and now I'm thinking about my mama, and the words of the song said, you know, my dad left my mom a heavy load, and you know, and my dad had died right before I got arrested, and I was like, man, this is my life, and I was really emotional. And a correctional officer walked by my cell right at that moment, and he said, man, you're 21 in prison. Don't you wish you could go to the bars? And I knew what he was talking about. He was talking about where you go drink, but I'd already been drinking from 16 years old, and I was pretty much an alcoholic at 17. I'd never been to a bar because I wasn't old enough. But I looked up through the bars. I said, sir, I am sick of bars. And it was at that moment I was sick of my life being the way it was. I was sick and tired of bars. I didn't know what to do. I'd been against God. How do I change? I got out of my cell that night, and there was a guy down the range from me. I called him old school. He was about 30 years old. And I told him what was going on. Told him, I said, man, I got to make a change. He said, youngster, if you want to change, he said, you need to change your nouns. I'm like, I done dropped out of high school. I slept through English class. I didn't even know what a noun was. What is a noun? Do you know? Anybody know what a noun is?
Oh, I know what nouns are. I went to a good school where you had to.
Yeah, so it's a nouns, person, place. He said change the people you're with, the places you're going, and the things you are doing.
Sure.
I said, man, you done lost your mind. I'm in this place. I'm with you people. And we still doing these things. We were still doing wrong things.
Yeah.
I said, man, I'm in prison. Ain't no way I can change. He said, people in prison change every day. That might as well have been the only word on that cell block. People in prison change every day. I said, well, what do I need to do? You know, I'm thinking some spiritual, he's going to tell me about this thing. He said, you're in a cell house. Go to the dorm. I said, why would I want to do that? I'm in a cell. I got my own TV. I got my own cell. I've got my own space. You go to the dorm, you're going to live with other men. He said, hey, you said you wanted to change. He said, you go to the dorm, you'll be in a new place. When you get to that new place, there'll be new people there. He said, then you can choose to do new things. And when I got to that new place, one of the first new people I met introduced me to Jesus Christ. And I wanted to argue with him because we had a table we needed to share, and he had his Bible and everything on it. And I wanted to argue with him to get his stuff off the table, but in the next 3 months, I found myself arguing with God. And
so you're in prison, and it's interesting because sometimes, you know, God knows us so well, and He had to put you behind bars to slow you down, and to bring you to this new kind of place in your life, this new realization, to bring about this change, this radical change, because it's radical. You were a Satanist, right? You were doing drugs, you were robbing, you were killing, and He had to put you in this place behind bars, better than sitting at a bar at 21, but being behind bars. And so this is going on in Keith's life. What's going on in your life, Misty? You're out of the hospital now, you've lost your scholarship, you've suffered from some depression, but what's going on in your life?
Scott and I had gotten married.
So you got married to Scott, the guy that was going a completely different direction from you.
We did. We got married a short time after the trial.
In your book, he gets called and actually comes to the hospital, right? Or goes to the hospital to see you. So yes.
Right. And then we got married, moved to California, which was 2,000 miles away from home. It was during Saudi Arabia, so he was running over to Hawaii, and they were running drills for Desert Storm in case they got called over. So I found myself, I was living by myself pretty much, 2,000 miles away from home. I really didn't know anybody. About 5 nights out of the week, I would end up in the ER I was experiencing panic attacks, and it seemed like it was happening around the same time every evening, around 5 or 6 o'clock. And it would take me over to where I couldn't breathe, and it felt like I was shot again. It felt like I couldn't breathe, like I was struggling when I was shot.
Had you ever gone through any counseling, like for PTSD?
No.
So you hadn't gone through any of that?
Not at that point, no.
Okay.
So, but when I got to California, they got tired of seeing me in the ER, so they sent me to see a psychologist in California. I went to the Naval Hospital, and I started seeing a psychologist, and they gave me a bunch of medications and a list of diagnoses: post-traumatic stress syndrome, panic attacks, anxiety attacks. The medications, all they did was make me sleep. It didn't really help me, just made me sleep and sleep and sleep. There would be days where I would sleep 2 or 3 days in a row and not even get out of bed. But it was miserable. It got so bad that they ended up giving Scott an honorable discharge from the United States military because of my mental health.
Wow, that's huge.
Yeah, we came back to Indianapolis.
How did he feel about that?
He was very supportive of me.
Okay.
And, you know, we were married, wanted to have a family, but I had to get better before we could do that. So I think all of it caught up to me. I got home, I did start doing better. They found the right medications for me. Even though I still didn't like taking them, I had to. And as of today, I still take one of them because of the chemical imbalance that I had in my from the swelling in my brain when I was shot.
Okay.
And I'll be on it the rest of my life.
Okay.
But you know, I'm here, so I'm thankful.
Yeah.
But we went on, came back to Indianapolis. We did eventually, 4 years after we were married, have our first child. She's 21 now.
Okay.
She is awesome. I do have, well, right now I have 4 kids. So,
okay.
But just living life, and we started going, Scott and I started going through several years later, about 8 years in, or almost 9 years into it, we started struggling relationship-wise. He decided a different path with somebody else, broke my heart.
Okay.
And that's when I came to a point in my life that I didn't want to be here anymore.
So this was another point in your life, another season in your life.
Yeah.
Your husband kind of went his own way, and so here you are now struggling again
with trust.
With trust, and this is a real low for you.
Yeah.
And what happens?
I called him one night and I said, I'd moved out on my own. This was the first time I'd lived on my own. And at that point, we had 2 kids. Austin was only 6 months old. And I'm a single mom living on my own now, just trying to make ends meet. And I called him. I was at my rock bottom. I called him. I said, can you come and get the kids? I don't feel good. And he came and got them. I never had any argument with that. He came and got him, and I went in the kitchen and got a knife. And I made one phone call, and that was to Tim, the same guy that pulled into the Burger King that night, because I knew I could talk to him and not be judged. And I told him where I was and what I was going to do. I was tired of being tired. During that time, let me go back a little bit. Before then, my niece was helping me watch my kids while I was working 2 and 3 jobs, my own family. And her friend came with her to babysit the kids one night because I went into work. And I went to my regular job on that Monday, and I came home to an empty house because her friend needed drug money. So not only was I now a single mom on my own, I'd been robbed, I lost trust. All my dreams for high school were gone. This is
tough.
Yeah,
this is tough.
So I'm on the phone with him, and he said, just get Tim Williams, and he said, just give me a few minutes, Misty, don't do anything, I'll be there in just a few minutes. And he was there. I mean,
this is the same man that rescued you when you were under that car that turned left instead of right. you know, and I know, and you know, as we're talking about this, and that question keeps coming up, you know, where is God in all of this? And as we continue to go through this story, I mean, it becomes even clearer.
Right.
The nouns are there.
Yeah.
And I do know what a noun is because I had to diagram sentences when I was in school. But it becomes clearer.
Right.
So here you are now at your lowest point.
Right.
The same man that was there for you when you were under that car is here for you again.
Yes. He knocked on the door. I let him in. We sat down on the kitchen floor because that's where I was. The knife was sitting in between us. And we sat there for almost 3 to 4 hours just talking. And I cried and cried. And I agreed to go to church with him, to sit down and talk with the pastor the same day. And I remember I spent that evening with him and his wife. And then I went home the next day and I picked myself up. I decided I wasn't going to be selfish. I wasn't going to do this to my kids. I was being selfish. I can't leave my kids here without without anything. I mean, they had their dad, but it was selfish.
Yeah.
But I had gotten that far that I just couldn't take no more.
Yes. Well, and I know, Keith, you attempted suicide when even before all of this had happened, and it was a failed attempt because you shot yourself. You thought you shot yourself in the head. That was a failed attempt, and now here we are after all of this. And here you are in this place in life. When you had already said this a few times about like, I don't want to live anymore. I don't want to live anymore. Right. So did you go to church then? And
we started going to church.
Okay.
And in October 2005, Tim Williams baptized me himself.
Wow. Okay. So how many years is that? 23 years later? 13 years
13
later.
years.
13
years later.
In October.
In October, same month, 2005. October 2nd, 2005. And he baptized me in his church, and it was such an honor for him because he's an angel. I mean, he saved my life on October 18th. He saved my life again 13 years later. Okay. Loves my kids.
All right, so, oh my goodness, there's so much to still talk about here. But no one in the audience knows like how the two of you ended up sitting on this couch.
Yes.
And how it is that you're even together at this point. And I have a message.
Yes.
And I don't know if this is the message that started this.
That's the first.
This is the very first message, and so I want to share this with you. And I hope I can read this well here, but Misty sends a Facebook message to Keith, and this is in 2010.
Yeah, December of 2010.
December of
I got released from prison in 2001.
Okay.
And then so I've been out at this time almost
eight or nine years. Okay. And so this message says, Keith, this is an odd way to contact you. I want to talk. And I'm asking this for me, and the me is in capital letters. I'm asking that my husband be present, who is very much wanting this also. This isn't about hate, fighting, or arguing. I want nothing like that. I have forgiven you. I mean, we just stop right there. And when we think about the scripture at the top of the program from Matthew, chapter 6, I believe it was, 14 and 15. Those words are so powerful. I have forgiven you. I honestly have a very hard time forgetting. My husband was not who I was with when all of this happened. We have been married 2 years, together for 6. He was locked up also, so he knows. I know my family will never forgive you. But I am the one ready to move on with my life.
Yes.
We both have a lot of beautiful kids and spouses. Thanks, Misty. Wow. Now this actually starts a whole new season in both of your lives. And what was your reaction when you got that message?
Opened up Facebook, as many people do. And I didn't even have a Facebook account when I entered seminary to become a Department of Correction chaplain. And I entered seminary, and I went to Indiana Wesleyan. And
a chaplain?
Yes.
You were a Satanist, and then you became a chaplain?
In prison.
In prison?
But I was in seminary at Indiana Wesleyan in Marion. I'm on campus.
Yes.
And one of our first assignments, we had to post a video on spiritual formation to a social network. And I didn't have any. And one of my classmates in seminary helped me set a Facebook page up. So now I have a Facebook, and I'm getting good at it, and I'm learning how to put videos on there, learning how to take pictures and how to check my messages. And I go home after a class, and it says I have a new message. I click on it, and her name pops up.
Sure.
My whole body, I mean, I knew the name.
Yeah.
She'd been a name that was on paper underneath my bunk in a prison cell on my court paperwork. I knew the name. And it had Misty Wright and then Wallace, but it said I knew Misty Wright. And as I read that, just trembling, I have forgiven you really was just transformational. Didn't take away my fears of, what does this mean? What is her angle? What is she trying to do?
I'm the offender because he's worried about what am I trying to do to him.
I didn't know, is this a setup? Or, I haven't had no contact for obvious reasons. So I talked to my wife, and then I talked to the Indiana Department of Corrections because I wanted to make sure it was okay.
Sure.
I mean, here I am getting ready to go to a career with the department at this time. And they said, well, let her have the ball, whatever she wants to do. And so I gave her my phone number, and she called me. And for 45 minutes, our first phone conversation, after that message, we had a phone conversation, 45 minutes, she gave me a front row seat to my crime. She told me the story that we're telling you and your viewers today. She told me things I didn't know. And you was like, well, how do you didn't know? You was the one that did it. I didn't know everything I had done. All I knew is what came out in court, and it didn't, so I didn't know why the car didn't start. I found out that night. I didn't know about Tim Williams. I found out about him that night. I knew I was a high school dropout going nowhere in life. I was going to be dead or in prison. I knew that. I found out she was a high school senior with a full ride scholarship to play softball. I learned that my bullet that I put in my gun, that I shot her, stayed in the back of her neck for 2 years. She was out in California driving and looked too far one direction, and that bullet moved, my bullet, while I'm in the cell saying I didn't do it. My bullet moved, and she wrecked into some parked cars. Thankfully, she didn't get hurt, and they was able to remove the bullet. But I learned all of that night. I learned so much more what I was accountable for. And a lot of people fear with forgiveness. They think, well, you're letting somebody off the hook. Her forgiveness, and if you're anybody's fisherman, it set the hook. I mean, it grabbed me further. I was already all in for God in ministry, but by being forgiven on this level, I mean, I don't know where you or the viewers and everybody's with forgiveness, but my forgiveness, it has a face.
Yeah.
I mean, it's beautiful. It's full of God's grace. It's full of mercy. I look at her and see if this is what Christ called us to do, and can we do it? She's demonstrated it can be done. I didn't deserve forgiveness, but she offered it freely through Christ that gave it to her freely.
What did it do for you, Misty?
Wow. Wow. It set me free too, because I don't have the panic attacks. I don't have the anxiety. I don't have, you question the fact of family. I was scared. I was scared about what my family would think of me, because I know they love me, and I know that they don't want me to be hurt. But
having said that, you still have family members today that don't get this, right, and that have not been able to forgive
after all these years,
Keith. After all of these years, but yet you obeyed Scripture and reached out to him and said, "I forgive you." And the two of you have co-authored this
Yes.
book, Face to Face, and I love the subtitle, Our Story of Crime, Repentance, and Forgiveness, because there's got to be repentance too, right?
Yep.
And here you are, the two of you today, and there's so much more to this story that folks really have to get the book. We were joking around about how this needs to be a movie.
Yeah.
It's so powerful. And now the two of you, married, have children, spiritually healthy, and both in ministry.
Yes.
And can you just talk briefly about Bridges to Life? Are you also involved?
Yes.
Both of you are involved
Yes.
with Bridges to Life. Talk a little bit about that ministry.
Bridges to Life is a restorative justice program. It's based in Houston, Texas. We're across the United States. We're in 119 prisons. Texas alone has that many prisons, but we are branched off into 7 different states and 3 different countries. Our latest, it's been translated in Ugandan, so it's in Uganda, and they are using it. It's a 14-week program. We do it twice a year, and I'm the only Indiana regional coordinator for the program in Indiana. It's non-for-profit. It's been 20 years since John Sage founded the program in Houston, Texas. His sister was brutally murdered by 2 teenage kids or teenage adults. They were 18 at the time, 2 19-year-olds. They ended up going to prison, and they both got death row for that murder. John is an awesome person. He went into prison and wanted to give back, and decided he was going to do something. What can he do to change in his sister's name? What can he go into prison and do? And recidivism, it was the main thing for him. He was good at numbers and
right, the recidivism rate of criminals. Going back to jail,
going back for another time,
was really high, and so this was a way that he wanted to address that, or somehow help to lower that recidivism rate. So, as I said earlier, there is so much more in this book. There are pictures in here, and Keith and Misty really share much more of what this journey to forgiveness and repentance looks like in their lives. And so you've got to get a hold of it. I just hope that in hearing this story, your heart has been touched, that first of all, that there is nothing that's impossible with God. With God, all things are possible, and that there is power in forgiveness. And like both Misty and Keith stated, it doesn't let the other person off the hook, but there's a freedom that comes with forgiving someone and letting go of the bitterness and the hate and the anger. And now that you've heard the story, you can see that God has been in all of it. And that we do live in a fallen world, and there are things that happen because of choices that we make. But even in the midst of that, God can take that mess and He can create a powerful message. And if you can read that message in their book, Face to Face. God loves you with an everlasting love.
Unravel me with a melody. You surround me with a song of deliverance from my enemies, till all my fears are gone. Now I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. Oh, I'm no longer